This conference will now be recorded.
Good. All right. So we have the Google Documents page up. People can go ahead and add your name there. This is Karen Moe. I'd like to welcome Megan, the new ESIP Community Coordinator. Is that a good title for you, Megan?
Sure. It's technically community director, but I think that would mean the same thing. So
Very good. Community Director. Um, we have a number of things coming up this fall.
Mhm.
And the one that we've got some action items due is the first topic that I listed on our agenda for today. So we're contributing to the ESIP webinar series and have a talk scheduled for November 15th. The series is a 1-hour webinar, and Erica, whose last name I don't have in front of me, she's organizing it for ESIP. And she's given us a number of action items to be sure that we're ready to put on a good webinar.
Erica, yeah. Erica.
Pardon me?
Is it Erica or Erika?
Arika.
Erika. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Erika. Yeah, so managing disasters through improved data-driven decision making. So we're going to spend a good chunk of our time today talking about our proposed plans for that. I've copied the draft abstract for the webinar in the email, and it's also on our Google Docs page. But I did want to open it up to see if there were some other topics that we really should be covering today. I have included the All Hazards Consortium's size working group meeting on the data-driven decision-making workshop that they held at the Edison Electric Institute in Washington, D.C. In the middle of September there. So I know Dave Jones and Bob Downs and myself attended portions or all of that 2-day session. So we'll get a little bit of feedback from that. And also, we had discussed at the summer meeting some ideas of following up with the operational readiness levels. And let's see. Oh, good. Thank you, Jessica. So we're seeing the Google Docs page there. But at the summer meeting in July, we talked about our progress with operational readiness levels and kind of where we've gone and where we're headed. And so I did get notification this week that we've been accepted to give an oral presentation. And I'm really pleased because I think that this particular presentation is very much highlights the work of not only the ESIP Federation, but also our collaboration and work with the All Hazards Consortium. So a really good forum for us to talk about how we did that collaboration and what it's resulting in thus far, and a little bit about what happens next. And then it's also about time to talk about what topics we want to pursue at the ESIP winter meeting. I'm not sure when, but I think the call for sessions will be opening pretty soon. Megan, you might know when we can anticipate that.
So I think it will be hot off the press in the next couple of days, and I know that the session proposals will be due by, I believe it's Friday, November 16th.
Great. Okay, so we have today's call maybe to open up some ideas and then focus on that a bit more at the next session. Are there any other topics that people would like to put on this list, whether we get to them today or at our next conference call is fine, but if we've got anything else, I'd like to open it up to add it now.
I just have a question regarding the AGU abstract status. Do you know if we'll have time to actually talk about planning that work or anything like that, or just AGU itself?
So I knew for sure if we were going to do a poster that we would include the ideas for the future work that we discussed at the summer meeting. We will have 15 minutes. It's really quick, and they really like for the presentations to leave 2 to 3 minutes for questions from the audience. And so that's going to be a tough question to answer right now. But
It might be possible.
ideally, I would like to.
It might be possible to put have one slide at the end about where do we see this going, how do we see this expanding and adapting to other areas. Because one of the really exciting things about the ORLs in my mind is that the process through which ORLs will be identified is a great project of Carrie Hicks at Duke Energy. And Carrie has indicated that she is willing to give this, algorithm on the web that she's putting together to the community, so the communities can adopt this and take it further for their own use. Specifically, I think she's talking about giving it up to the other utilities, so it can be a utility-wide kind of standard. But I think that it could also apply within the Federation, and so we could enable that to take on its own life perhaps within the Federation. So that might be a good future kind of slide.
Very good. Yeah, captured a note for that.
And Karen, as you capture that, I would love to hear from Megan for a minute, just on what Megan's priorities are and what your job entails at ESIP, so everybody knows, so we don't ask you to do things that you may not be in your daily week, but we can take advantage of ones that are.
Absolutely. So you may have seen a little bit of information about me, but I come from a background in geochemistry. I was most recently a data manager at the AIDA data facility, and I worked as kind of a project coordinator for several different EarthCube efforts. And it was really in that work that I kind of realized a love for facilitating collaborations and trying to make connections between people. I really like getting to know people and what they're passionate about. And sometimes, I don't necessarily need to know to the finest detail what you guys do, but to know enough so that I can say, hey, maybe you should be talking to this other person. I think you might, have something important to share with one another. So my role initially as community director is to really join all of the telecons of all of the clusters and see where they're at, just to kind of have that encyclopedic knowledge of what's going on. And again, that's from the perspective of really figuring out what you need not from any kind of, trying to oversee what you're doing at all. And along those lines, I'm in the process of drafting an email which will go to all of the chair people of the clusters. And I really want to have a brief call with each of the chair people to talk about, what's gone on over the last year, what your plans are for the next year, and again, to get a sense for what kind of support you need and what synergies I can help to facilitate. And so I'm happy to have that conversation on the phone, with just Karen, or I'm happy if a larger part of the group wants to be a part of it. Even just in the last few days, I've only been on, 2 or 3 calls before this. This is literally my first week. But I can tell that all the clusters are at very different stages from each other and working at different levels of granularity. So I hope that gives you a sense. I'm kind of realizing what my role is as I'm going here too. So don't be afraid to ask me for anything. There's nothing you can do wrong, and I will let you know if I'm not the right person.
Awesome. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, and Dave Jones and I are both co-chairing this cluster on disaster life cycle. And then, of course, Jessica is our fellow.
Mm-hmm. So, Karen, would you like that conversation to be with just you, or with you and the co-chair and Jessica, or what are you, or do you want to get back to me on that? You can.
Yeah, no, I think the 3 of us would be a
Okay.
good conference call with you. That would be very helpful.
Awesome. All right. So look out for that email from me. It's going to be a little bit of a logistical challenge to schedule 20 plus of these, but hopefully we can work it out.
Yeah, that sounds great.
And it looks like, some of that may be helpful for some of these things you're preparing for anyways, kind of thinking about the future. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Look forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too.
Okay, Karen, do we want to, do you want to, is there anyone else that might have anything before we dive into the?
Yeah, this is Don Sullivan. If I can jump in for a sec.
Hey, Don.
I've got my feet in a number of different efforts here, different communities, and I'm pretty much saying the same thing in all of them, and that is I'd really like to see more work done on a crosswalk between the ORL concept and the analysis ready data concept that's being pushed by Landsat and CIOS and a lot of other people. Open Data Cube. They're really talking very similar things, and I'd really like to see an alignment there. The other thing I want that I'd like to put as an agenda item, put it at the end. But then the other thing is, pretty much everybody on the call is aware of the disasters interoperability concept study that's being run by the OGC for FGDC and DHS. We released to the Emergency and Disaster Management Working Group today, about an hour ago. The report came out of that, the development of a disaster spatial data infrastructure for disaster resilience. That should be available publicly very, very shortly, and I'll get out to this group. But it's a really good report. A lot of people did a lot of really good work on it. And that was it. I'll go.
That sounds great, Don. How are you going to let us know? Are you just going to send that out?
I'll send it to the mailing list. I sent it to the EDM earlier today. I just have to make sure that the sponsors, that FGDC and DHS are comfortable with me disseminating more widely, and then I will do it right away.
And so this is a response from the workshop that was held at NOAA?
This is the response to the workshops that were held at NOAA and in California.
And in California.
It's a compendium of both, yes.
Including the requests for information that were asked.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yes.
That sounds terrific. Thanks. That's great news.
All right. Thank you. I'll go back to mute.
So one other quick question, and it might be something for Don, but also for Megan, and that is, Don, you mentioned about seeing some crossover work with our ORL evolution and Open Data Cube and work for Landsat and all that stuff. How does that crossover work in your mind? How do you see that happening?
I see the efforts addressing the same community, me, and that it's addressing the critical issue: is this data crap, or is it good? Can I trust it? What is the provenance? What is the metadata associated with it? How's it been processed? Who's got their thumb on it? So they're coming at the answer that I need from two directions, and I'm just hoping that we can do a crosswalk between the two to at least harmonize it and make sure that there isn't confusion. I mean, because right now there are two very, very good sort of meta standards on standards, ARD and ORL, and I'd like to see them, if not harmonized, at least, a crosswalk so that people know when they're using one what the other one means, that sort of thing.
Do you think this benefit from an in-person kind of is this an event at ESIP, or is this a longer term conversation? What mechanisms?
I don't know, but Landsat, the Landsat group, CIOS, and then the people who are working on the Open Data Cube are all endorsing and describing their data as being analysis-ready data. That means something. I'd like what it means to be able to be crosswalked with what we're talking about with an ORL.
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting and a good conversation. I think Karen, it might intersect what we've talked about with applying ORL levels to research versus operations, and what levels of operations does do ORLs pertain to, and how does that change? Because we're operational readiness levels for the level that we're talking about for utilities to make decisions. They're not diving down and doing analysis of data. They're just saying, hey, I trust this information. I can make a decision, and we're moving forward with it. Versus the perhaps deeper levels for scientific analysis that might be that are evolving. Does that make sense, Don?
Yeah, it does. And I'd just like to avoid possible confusion in the user community about what the two things are and what they're doing.
Right. Okay.
That's an excellent point.
It sounds like. I'm sorry, Karen.
I was just going to comment about even the word trusted data, that in many communities that trusted data means that it's secure, and that's its main point, whereas we're using the word trusted data in that the end user has an understanding of how to use it, as well as it's being reliable and secure. Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's good to know. I'm not familiar with the analysis-ready data, so that'll be one of the things we'll want to explore, is informing our whole group about that effort.
This might be.
This is Bob Downs. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dave.
I'm sorry, Bob. I was just going to say this. I'm thinking, Megan, this might be a topic. We might make this a topic of discussion in the winter meeting, perhaps in the disaster lifecycle cluster, or maybe a broader presentation that's plenary that is a presentation on these evolving standards and what they might mean. But it probably are two groups to talk about beforehand, I would suspect.
And this is Bob Downs. I just wanted to say that relatedly, there is the maturity matrix effort that looks at evaluating data, research data that's coming out of ESIP as well. And relatedly also is the FAIR, FAIR. Then at the AGU session where you'll be presenting, Karen, that session was originally organized to look at all these different types of evaluation, but as it turned out, that session got merged with two others, so it's kind of an eclectic uh, cornucopia now. So it's got a lot of different things in it besides that.
And notice has a nice long name.
Yes.
The session name is, yeah. Yeah, that I realize that happens. Yeah. So, but these are definitely topics that we can pursue in more depth
Hey, Karen,
here. Yes.
this is Phil Balin. I just pasted a note to you about our interactions out in California with NASA through the Earthquake Clearinghouse. We've had several efforts to understand in terms of what NASA can create and how to create it. We've been working with two different groups, Carver Struve, on developing how do our local agencies know how to request UAV SAR or various products through remote sensing of contamination that might occur if we had a major earthquake. We're headed to creating a product actually, which is a request form that's filled out and then socialized with our local agencies so that they don't need to know what the name of the sensor is, but all the detail information has already been filled out, and all they have to know is we've just had a major earthquake out here. We have contamination issues due to refineries and broken pipelines, and we need some help on identifying that. That's on one of the efforts in contamination, and then another effort is on deformation, where UAV SAR would be using. And in terms of trusted information, I think we've all recognized, and in those workshops you did in DC and in Moffett Field, people pointed out if they're not already familiar with the people and what the data is and then how to use the data, they're not likely to use it. So this project that, again, Don Sullivan's part of too, in another area, that's that number 2 point I put up there, this is what we're doing out here in California to get people more familiar with what NASA can do and how to request it. The second area is we recognized in our fires out here last year and the year before how image and air coordination is not being well done, and that NASA produced for FAA a Whirlwind software that's very widely used both through them, I think the Pentagon too. But the point is that we need help with air coordination, and this software, if we can adjust it to be useful for our air coordination out in our local disasters out here, would be very helpful. And so our next step in that area is actually to have a meeting, hopefully in Moffett, and have some of the people in the California side that haven't seen the software, what it can do, why it's important, see that. So I just wanted to put a plug in for, again, your effort is getting people to use your data, know about it. We're on our side trying to reach up and say, what do we have to do and how could we better define that so that our locals know how to reach out and ask for help. Does that make sense?
Indeed, it does.
And Phil, does that, like, this is Dave Jones, does the making requests like that, does that include having the requester know what the data latency is going to be or the time to fulfill that?
Exactly. It's recognized that often a user will have a need for data at a certain time. There will be several options and assets that may or may not be able to be used. And that, a discussion first off is simply, is there an asset that's available in the time frame that the user needs the information? Because what we're trying to do is understand between requesting of NASA, USGS, and even private industry, what are our different options? And you folks who have been actively, responding to earthquakes, again, our local agency people simply aren't familiar enough with what that process looks like, who's going to pay for it, if it's a federally declared disaster. When we know that FEMA is going to pay some part of it, we certainly would like to have circulated this filled out form to them and say, what do you think? Is this the right information that would allow us to get the greatest amount of payback from you? So that local agencies know if they ask for something, what they're likely going to have to pay for. Does the dollar thing is really important, and it's kind of a gray area between, I'm sure, yourselves and FEMA. And then, of course, the local agencies need to know, well, what is their part of it?
Well, and I would say one of the other challenges might be, for people who know nothing about this process and they want data or information, what has already been gathered and what is available.
Exactly. In the area of image identification, our ability to find data is challenging because we have the USGS HDDS portal, NASA has a portal, FEMA has a portal, and then there's certain commercial companies that have portals, and you almost have to be authenticated in each of those different systems to be able to query the imagery that's available, the products that are being created. And sometimes you may just want the raw data from one group to be able to be used for a derivative product in another, or to use them together. But we're recognizing that these are one of the challenges we need to understand, is that each portal has their tool of development, let's say, for searching it, and that keywords are there. But again, we have these 2 or 3 major portals that in an emergency we often see data go to.
Yeah.
One of the things go ahead, Karen.
Okay. I was just going to comment, Phil, that I know you attended one of the All Hazards Consortium, the SIZE working group meetings that we had earlier this year, and you could see that that group bringing together federal, state, local government, along with private industry in a number of different sectors, but primarily starting with the power industry, addressing exactly that problem of first finding out what's available, and then finding out how to access it, how to use it, and then do you really need to be authorized on each of these systems, or how to work through those kinds of issues.
Right. I think go ahead.
I was just going to say, which happens to align very well with what we're trying to achieve in our ESIP webinar in the middle of November.
Okay. I'm wondering if, and maybe that's something to talk about in November, is simply if the different portals would think about creating web services of what they have available, and then securely being able to serve that out. So again, people could add those generic standardized web services of what their contents are, so that one could pull from several different federal agency portals. I haven't seen that conversation go on, but we certainly, as I agree with you, we brought that up at the Moffett Field meeting.
Yeah, that approach is the way to go, Phil, I think, because when people stand up web services, that's exactly what GeoCollaborate was designed to do, is pull from those disparate web services and put the data on a collaborative common operating system.
But thanks for the opportunity. I wanted to have some local input about, that you are working out here actively with California, and we're hoping to pursue these couple areas.
That's great.
Very good. Yeah, and I think that ties in well with the crosswalk topic that Don had suggested, and I think that these areas are going to be ones that we will very likely want to expound upon at our winter meeting, and possibly another forum in amongst them. But we'll have to see. But good topics. Well, we're at our halfway mark. I'd like to go ahead and take a quick look now at the webinar abstract, which we posted here. So Dave and I have been working with Erika on ideas for this webinar, and one of our points was to see what kind of focus came out of the most recent SIZE working group that was held in DC recently. And so we came up with this abstract and actually involved Tom Moran, heads up the All Hazards group, to kind of refine this. And so we've got it up here as a pretty mature draft. It was Erika wanted it on the 1st, and I told her that we were working on it and would have it to her after today's meeting. So anyway, people, if you've had a chance to give a read through, want to open it up to comments, just in terms of, you know, the intent and the kind of information to be shared during this webinar.
Karen, this is Bob Downs. I was just wondering, are the other talks going to be about disasters as well, or something
At this
else?
webinar on the 15th,
Yes.
yeah, we will be doing the entire webinar. So we have
Oh.
responsibility for the whole hour.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So, but Erika has pretty good guidelines for us. So we're anticipating potentially having 4 speakers, which gives each person about 10 minutes. We talked last month about focusing on the community, the disaster community's perspective, more so than the data provider's perspective. And so we had a very good discussion with Tom Moran. I had asked him, and he agreed to participate in our on a panel for the webinar, and so he actually sat down with us and looked through the whole abstract, and so we got his feedback on that just this week. Dave, why don't you fill in a little bit? You had a big role in putting the abstract together.
Sure. I mean, the approach was really to have it led by a key user of this information that helped to drive a lot of feedback for the ORL levels. So Karen is going to moderate the webinar, and so she'll introduce each of the speakers. And we were thinking that Tom Moran from the All Hazards Consortium would go first, and he could lay out the problem. You know, what is the problem that they had? What is the cost associated with that problem? So, you know, this ESIP webinar is focused on the socioeconomic value of earth science data, information, and applications. And we're going to take it into a specific sort of use case, which is managing disasters through improved data-driven decision making. So in order to do that, Tom Moran at the All Hazards Consortium would lay the groundwork of the history of what we're talking about, focusing on the problem and getting it solved quickly, talking about use cases and the disaster lifecycle cluster response for fleet utility vehicles is a tremendous incurs tremendous cost that's reimbursed by federal funds or ratepayers. For example, like in Hurricane Sandy, the response for the entire electric industry was at a cost of between $15 and $20 million per hour for the response of these vehicles. And so the more you can streamline access to data and drive decision making much more quickly and efficiently, you're saving real bucks that ultimately come out of our pocket either as taxpayers or ratepayers for our utilities. So everybody's got an incentive to lower that. So you know, we put together the test bed, and we put together the data sharing and collaboration capability under the ESIP funding in the test beds to test it out for a couple years. And then ultimately now it's become an operational thing that the utilities rely upon to help make their response more efficient. So Tom will talk about that. He'll have about 10 minutes, and then I'll go after Tom to talk about evolving, working with the All Hazards Consortium and the utilities and emergency managers within the sensitive information sharing environment, and placing all the decision makers on the same map at the same time, which is the evolution of GeoCollaborate under the ESIP testbed activities. And that'll be 10 minutes. And then having Carrie Hicks from Duke talk about the ORLs itself and the evolution of that, and how you identify, and how she's identifying operational readiness levels within Duke Energy so they can make them more trusted, data-driven decision-making levels. And then that would be sort of like a specific use case for a utility replying or responding to a disaster. And then we would hand it, Karen would introduce Maggie from JPL about examples for, we've done this for utilities. Now, how can we apply ORL levels to other decision-making environments, like responding to earthquakes and getting data together, just like Phil was describing about how can you get data and identify data and trust that data to make rapid assessments and decisions when you're responding to an earthquake or some other major disaster, whether it's a tsunami or volcano or something like that. And so Maggie can describe about the efforts in California that they're working with Phil, and working with the clearinghouse, earthquake clearinghouse, and all that stuff. So we can apply these ORL levels, and we see a future for applying these ORL levels to these other disasters. And then there'll be a wrap up and question and answer for 15 to 20 minutes. It's important to have 15 to 20 minutes open. I think there's going to be a lot of questions. I think there's going to be people that want to understand the ORL process a little bit more, who might want to contribute to it, and who might want to apply ORL levels to their areas. And certainly we've talked about here a lot that ORL levels for operational decision making in the utility sector we're pretty good about. But what about applying these ORL levels to other decision-making environments, which, an ORL 1 might mean something different to somebody else who's using it a certain way, or, things like that. So, we've kind of been through this process a number of times in telling this story, but I think for this particular webinar series, we're really spun up pretty well to engage the rest of the ESIP community in this discussion, and hopefully get additional people who want to participate. And that's why I think from a community perspective, Megan, it'll be great for you to participate in this one, to just see what kind of reaction comes, and what kind of other connections you can make by knowing others that are participating.
Absolutely. I will definitely be there. That sounds like a very full and interesting webinar.
So Karen, I think that's probably it. Was there anything else that I might have forgotten to say?
Yeah, so I did send out a request to Maggie. Last month we had talked to her. We had talked at our conference call about the webinar, and proposed the idea that she could talk about the earthquake clearinghouse, earthquake clearinghouse, and how they've used a very similar process. And in fact, we kind of borrow off of these practices of how we get our data available and used by communities for disaster response activities. And there's a lot of similarities there. So the idea was that she could provide that additional perspective, as Dave was saying. Although I have not heard back from her, so we're still and I don't think she was able to join us.
Hey,
This is
can I
Phil.
ask Dave a question?
Is Phil Berlin still on the line?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, are you going to be at the meeting?
No, I hadn't made plans to. I've been pushing my conference limit with different disciplines this year greatly, and I've probably far exceeded my travel requests. I just went to International Association of Crime Analysts, if you can imagine us reaching out to law enforcement so that they know what I mentioned you guys. I mentioned you guys need to learn how to talk to NASA, but again, we're recognizing we have to reach out to multiple disciplines.
Yeah, the full name of my OGC group is actually Emergency and Disaster Management, Law Enforcement and Public Safety. So I know exactly what you mean.
Okay, good. But thank you. I wish I could get there.
Yeah. Well, this one, of course, is a online webinar, but it's exactly what you're saying. You've only got so many hours.
But I think it's great that you're doing it. People need to see what that process is. And I just wanted to add to your last speaker that if you could walk folks through that request form, I think when you request data from NASA or a product from NASA, it helps a lot of people to see that there's a form that is going to ask them, what is it you want, what format it is, where do you want it to go, to get them thinking this ahead of time. Because there's a lot of pertinent questions that they're not familiar with and they kind of get glossed over. So I just wanted to point that out.
So, Phil, there is a draft of this request form available, I gather.
I've seen one. I don't know if NASA has made an established form. It made, hurricanes versus our earthquakes. I don't know. There should be a standard form simply that lets somebody identify, what kind of damage data do they need, be it deformation, be it fire damage or contamination, and then somehow leave it to you guys to figure out the assets, but to ask them the specifics of when do they need the data, what format, if any, do they need it in, are you going to host it for them? A lot of really good questions. Who's going to pay for it? Do you have funding? Those are things that I think I've seen a 2-page form before coming out of you, NASA. And so, again, it might have been a temporary draft form. I just recognize it as very valuable to socialize to our state, local agencies so that they think about this ahead of time.
That's interesting. That would be worthwhile to investigate and see what NASA might be doing in that area. As you were speaking, however, what was ringing in my mind was how we focus on use cases. And this is something that ESIP has been very active in the use case. And it's something that Tom Moran and his group, he's fully embraced this idea where you describe the problem. And what we found in using the use case with Carrie Hicks and her community was that going that next step about requesting specific data took an intermediary. You basically had to have a GIS-aware person who can help the person solving their problem. And so she filled that role for Hurricane Matthew, and that's where you got some specifics about the data that would then be meaningful to the data provider community. So it is a complex set of steps, and anything that we can do to simplify that, maybe, an idea of a request form.
Aaron,
I think we
a
go
quick
ahead.
question in. Just getting back to Dave's comment way back. Dave, is there any way you can lean on Carrie or Tom to kind of come up with at least some anecdotal quantitative information about, how many utility truck days they might have saved using GeoCollaborate? Do you have any of that kind of stuff, or have you seen them talk in those terms?
That's a good question, Bob. I know Tom's going to talk up front about the challenges in Sandy and the amount of money that was spent, and just 2 days were lost with trucks trying to get across state borders past way stations and toll booths. So that's a problem that they continue to address and are addressing successfully. But I think that the coordination activities are getting people on site faster. I don't know if he has any hard numbers to say here's what's happened, but he might have some anecdotal feedback from people who are in the field and who I mean, for example, once we started putting the waivers and the state declarations of emergencies within the dashboard, so people could just click on the red state and then that's declared a state of emergency and have those documents in hand. It has speeded up the passage of vehicles through states. But I don't know what the quantification is. Did that help power get restored a few hours earlier? Did they get on site sooner? You would think so, but I haven't heard.
Yeah, well, I just think trying to get them to even so those anecdotes, but with a little bit of quantitative effort. They may have that internally and not be willing to share it, but I think that would really add a lot to the discussion if there are just a few examples like that.
Well, and this webinar is focusing on the socioeconomic value of earth science data, right? So we need to all be cognizant of that and how the value of remote sensing information, of bringing disparate data sets together in ways that it hasn't been before, are all pointing towards saving time and money, saving lives too.
And Tom definitely has the problem side quantified in some anecdotes that he can share. Why we're addressing these problems because of the costs involved. But I don't know, as Dave said, I don't know if he has the benefit side, if he's quantified the benefit side.
Yeah. I mean, we're definitely dealing with big numbers, because when you're talking about power restoration and movement of utilities, when, I don't know if anybody knows it or not, but when a utility gets called from, let's say, Michigan to go down to Florida, and Florida Power and Light says, yeah, we need 100 bucket trucks, and they get them from Michigan. As soon as the people get in the trucks and start them up in Michigan, Florida Power and Light starts paying. And so if they're sitting on the side of the road because they're waiting for authorization to get reentry from FEMA because they've closed certain areas due to the disaster, Florida Power and Light is paying that hourly bill. And you multiply that by 100 bucket trucks and 200 men and women, you can see where it starts tallying up very quickly.
So we've got about 10 minutes left. Are there other comments about the webinar, points that we should make? I got Bob Chen's comment about see if we can quantify the benefit thus far. That was a good idea if we can get that, and if there are other ideas that we should try to analyze and put in that webinar.
So just curious, because I may not have followed everything. Is only Tom coming, or is Carrie and anybody else from industry going to speak?
Yes.
We've invited Carrie as well.
Yeah, Carrie and
Yeah. So I mean, I if we can just informally twist Carrie's arm because she must have some internal data from recent events at Duke Energy about just even internally, but she may have to get approval to say something publicly. So I just think it would be really interesting if even little, they have to be comprehensive, but just little real examples of exactly the kind of thing you were saying, Dave. Well, we think there were at least you know, $5 million worth of delays that were avoided because of this. You know, those numbers are few and far between, even if they're very rough.
Yeah, yeah. And if they're coming from industry, then they're very powerful words that all of us can use in justifying all the sacrifices that we're making to get us to where we are. That's everybody on this call and beyond. Well, that sounds good. I mean, you know, I think Karen and I were talking for a while yesterday or the day before when we were trying to put this approach together. You know, you always are tempted to make the webinar chock full with information, and you want to get through this, this, and this. But you know, we want to slow it down, and we want to make sure that the information is communicated accurately and it's communicated in such a way that people can digest it. So we want to give each section, you know, 10 minutes with 4 speakers, and then have ample time for discussion. And we want everybody to be on the webinar so you can spur additional discussion. And I know, Phil, that you're chock full, but on the 15th from 12 to 1 or 12:30 to 1:30 East Coast time, it's just a 1-hour webinar for people to participate in. And you know, it might be good to if you have an hour to spare, to at least chime in on some things or suggest some things. Could be very helpful.
I'll be happy to. I'll try to make that clear and do that.
Yeah, awesome.
That's great. That's great. One of the things that might come out of this is that, of course, these webinars are recorded and available at the USIP site. And Tom Moran in this particular community is being very proactive in putting together short tutorials about various elements of his environment and his way of getting things done. And certainly he's gotten very good feedback from Homeland Security and FEMA, his funding sources, that, you know, they like what he's doing. And I can envision this webinar potentially being one that he can use for his community to explain, you know, how we're improving our whole process through this data focus, making data matter, as ESIP would say.
You know, Karen, one thing I was thinking for your webinar, we're always trying to figure out how to communicate sort of complicated scientific capabilities in a simple way. And I haven't seen very often something that says to the viewer at the EOC manager level, simply there's several kinds of damages that they need assessed, and something that says, you know, structural damage, and then shows an example or two of your various capabilities of that, just so that they maybe don't remember the sensor that's used, the pattern that's used, but simply coordinate it with, oh, they have something that will do damage assessment. Oh, they have something to do with contamination, or one or two of the other kinds of event-driven data sets that they need to have. And, you know, I'm more and more feeling like the less I can scientific, it's not a word, but the more I can communicate in the terms EOC managers use about the kind of damage information you're able to create, and then show them some pictures of it and say, what do you need to know about this? Okay, and so that they can request it. That might be something to think about as a way of communicating to, if your audience is, you know, that more local level, something that might work, that might, you know, you might try that out. I'm trying to do that more now, you know, just show pictures and associate it directly with the kind of damage. As I think of your hurricanes, your floods, or our earthquakes, or our fires, we often have buildings that used to be there and they're not there anymore. So if your task in recovery is to do damage assessment, how useful would a data set be that showed simply we're able to detect what used to be there and is no longer there, and give you a quick map of it so you know where to go to investigate first. That's that kind of idea.
Yeah. That's really a great, that was Phil, right?
Yeah,
Talking.
yeah.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's perfect. I was just on a telecon yesterday for the JPSS program at NOAA, and and FEMA was on, and other, organizations, Raw Forest Service, and I said, the more we can get responders, I mean, I guess it doesn't really have to be part of their job description, but when first responders arrive on a scene, if they can snap a picture and send it somewhere and it goes in to help us validate and verify remote sensing information, then we'll have this almost like professional crowdsourced type of information coming in that can be compared against remote sensing, that we can verify, yeah, that building isn't there, or this is flooded, and so that one pixel does mean flood and water and things like that. I think, we kind of rely on citizen scientists in the community to do crowdsourcing, but we have first responders out there that could, not that the first thing they want to do is take pictures and send them in, but hey, they're there, and that information can really help uh, calibrate and validate certain information we're trying to verify.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. And if you had a simple ability to upload like a shape file, some simple GIS format, because in EOCs, as soon as the incident occurs, they're immediately compiling damage information. So rather than enter one at a time in a photograph, if they can simply take this compiled data set that at a particular point they could just upload to you, that would give you a lot, it would facilitate giving you ground truthing data.
Yeah. And there are apps like that are available, and maybe not customized to the way we exactly need them, but the technology is there. It's not a technology issue. It's
No, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
an implementation issue to people who say, "Oh, here's another thing I have to do."
Right. That's why I was saying if they're already doing it in this format, if they could simply take their file, zip it, and upload it, that
Yep.
would be rather minimal on their end and give you multiple records rather than one at a time.
No, that makes sense. I think Karen.
And both could be done. You could do it both ways for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think a key to that kind of interaction with those responders is to understand, we have to bridge that gap between understanding how they view the problem and the information that they're seeking and how we view, from a data provider's point of view, the products that we have available and how to link them to that problem. And it's a human problem. That communication gap is something that actually that we're trying to address with operational readiness levels. And but its complexity is because you're dealing with the cognitive level of understanding the data. Challenging.
I mean, all this work that's going on in disaster lifecycle cluster is so relevant to, I mean, the fact we're seeing more extreme events, more people are being impacted, data sets that people have been working on. I mean, look at CDAC and the population information and all that stuff. I mean, I'm in more telecons these days where people say, I need population information, or I want to know who lives here and there. And, I mean, I think we're coming to a point, and the technology is enabling this, that we're really able to put this data to work. And not that people want to know all the lineage of the data, but we're making sure that that data, when presented, is trusted. And it really is, I think, elevating not just the disaster lifecycle cluster, but the ESIP Federation, the All Hazards Consortium, CDAC, and all those organizations to really be contributors to a much bigger effort that is going to save lots of time and money and also lives. So I think we're over time, Karen.
Yes. Yes, it did kind of fly by. So I think we're on a roll. I think we have a plan moving forward. not only for the webinar, but some ideas for our upcoming sessions, our conference calls, as well as starting to formulate our ESIP winter meeting session, which would be due November 16th, the day after the webinar. So I think we can work on these things in parallel because they're definitely they're related. That makes it a good story for us. I want to thank everybody for contributing today. Appreciate especially meeting Megan and understanding that we've got some help coming to get some of our ambitious goals done. So I think we'll definitely have a conference call the first Thursday of November, and we'll be needing to get some work done before then. So I guess we should close up now. If there's any other important things people want to bring up before we say goodbye.
I would just say, Karen, when we're done, don't forget to stop the recording.
Excellent point. Thank you.
The recording
All right,
stops.
everybody.
I'll log out.
Okay, great.
Thanks, everybody.
Nice to meet you all. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Megan. You too. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome, Megan. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye now.